And welcome Monday morning. It's the week of November 12th. 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C., we had the first of what we hope to be many production retreats East Coast. Some of you were probably in attendance. We had a great group. We had 600 participants at our first East Coast production retreat. And it was interesting because one of the questions that came up several times to me, and in a small event when you have 600 people, we can do a lot of Q&A that we can't do at our big retreats, which some of you attend. The question came up is, how do I become a little more effective at closing to get a signature after I make either a listing presentation or work with a buyer? So I went to our notes and I pulled up the section on closing, and I wrote down 8 points that I want you to strongly consider. Here's the first point that I wrote down on closing, or in essence, getting them to sign a contract, buyer or seller. I wrote down, first of all, remember, a great appointment, which is, of course, what you and I are always trying to accomplish, is when the prospect that you're talking to needs the services you have to offer, and they can see that your services will help them achieve the goals they've set. All right, so a great appointment is when you have a person that is motivated and qualified, buyer or seller, that actually has a big need for the services you have to offer, and they can see that your services are going to help them, whether it be buy a home or sell a home, and they can see that very clearly and very plain. This, I wrote down, makes the close quite simple. See, the challenge is when you have an unmotivated, unqualified buyer or seller, and you make your listing presentation, you show them 3 or 4 homes, and then you're in that awkward moment of how do I get them, or do I get them to sign a contract? And it's very challenging. So the key to this whole process of closing is to make sure that the person you're talking to has a need for what you do. And we do that through the pre-qualifying process. Second point I wrote down, being a good closer is more about the attitude you have, the enthusiasm that you show, and the confidence and belief than it is using strong words or some type of thought in intimidating them to sign a contract. If you believe that people buy because of the quality of what you say, which I think most of you understand, if you believe that the energy and enthusiasm you bring to a presentation always affects their need or their ability to get involved with you quicker, if you believe that, then you can see why attitude, obviously, enthusiasm, confidence you display, and the belief you have are critical to the process. Third point I wrote down, don't be afraid to be direct when asking for the signature. You don't have to be hard or difficult. You know, I've listened to everybody that I can find on how to sell. I've read thousands of books. I've listened to thousands of the old cassette tapes, CDs, DVDs today on this whole concept of selling. And of course, one part of selling is always the process of closing to get a signature completed. And it's interesting how often the speaker, the trainer, coach, I'm not exactly sure why they do this, make the process of getting a signature very complicated. It's not complicated, okay? And the more direct you are. Now, remember, if you're fulfilling the need of the buyer or seller in what you say in your presentation, the close is very direct and to the point. So I want you to write down the following. Would you sign the contract, please? Okay, watch. Would you sign the contract, please? Not complicated. It's not sophisticated. It's certainly what they understand. Now, I remember going to seminars years ago where they'd say, oh, never say to a buyer or seller, would you sign the contract, please? And I put up my hand and I said, well, if I'm not going to say, would you sign the contract, please, what would I say to a seller or a buyer after the presentation when I want to get a signature on the contract? And they would say, well, say things like, would you approve the earnest money? And I said, okay, what's the earnest money? Well, that's the contract a buyer signs. And that's a sophisticated term for a purchase agreement or a contract a buyer would use. And I said, well, I don't understand, because we buy things all the time. It's called human nature. We sign contracts all the time. It's human nature. We understand the word sign give us a signature. We understand the word contract. Why would we complicate it? So what I want you to start saying to yourself 50 times a day, always with a smile, would you sign the contract, please? Would you sign the contract, please? And you have to practice it because like any other script, it's easy to get a little nervous, get a little hesitant, possibly lose some of your confidence at the end because you haven't practiced that simple script. See, here's what I wrote down. Closing is really technically a natural ending to a good presentation. If I make a great presentation to the buyer or seller, they anticipate, they expect, they want to be closed. Okay, they're not going to sit with you on a listing presentation and for 15, 20, 30 minutes if they didn't have the desire to do something, if the circumstances we present are proper. They wouldn't sit there. They would find a way to excuse you, excuse themselves, bring it to an end. So the truth is, if the buyer is willing to look at the number of homes you're willing to show, they're qualified, they're motivated. If the seller is qualified, motivated, then the close is nothing more than a natural ending. You know, I use this example. You're in a nice restaurant. It's not uncommon. The waiter, towards the end of the service of the meal, will say, would you like a cup of coffee or tea? They will often bring a dessert menu and say, would you like some dessert to end your evening? It's a natural ending, okay? So what I want you to think about is the close is the natural ending, like coffee or dessert. It's not complicated. The waiter doesn't walk up and say, well, you know, I'm trying to make this easy for you. Do you, well, would you consider? No, they just say, would you like coffee and would you like dessert? It's a natural ending. Would you sign the contract, please? Okay. Now, Doug Edwards, the famous real estate trainer, 50s, 60s, and 70s, had a great line. And I don't know if you ever heard J. Douglas Edwards speak, but I thought he was one of the more dynamic speakers that we ever experienced in the sales field. And he had a loud, booming voice. So you have to excuse what I'm going to do next because it gets a little loud for just a moment. Because Doug would stand up before a wonderful audience and he would say the following. Now listen carefully. Whenever you ask a closing question, and then he would scream, shut up, until they answer. So what I wrote down is the following. When you and I ask a closing question, would you sign the contract, please? Don't speak again until the prospect does. Because, see, often we want to jump in. Would you sign the contract, please? But I know if you don't need to buy this house, we have others to show you. Would you sign the contract, please? Now, I know that you're probably going to compare companies, compare me to somebody else. Well, maybe, possibly, sometimes we create the objection, we create the question they're going to ask before they have a chance to ask it or give us an objection. Or maybe after the presentation, when you say, would you sign the contract, please? Maybe they're planning on signing the contract. Whoa, wouldn't that be great? So then I wrote down the following. If you follow the listing presentation process we offer, verbatim, and you're sitting in front of a pre-qualified motivated seller, which we assume you are, the close is simple. When you haven't pre-qualified them and you don't know their motivation, the close becomes not only complicated, but very difficult. So would you sign the contract, please? Would you sign the contract, please? Would you sign the contract, please? If you've seen me speak in an audience, I'll often say out loud with a big smile, would you sign the contract, please? 1, 2, 3. And they all yell it out. And then I'll say, how many felt chest pain or palpitations? How many got the nervous twitches? How many started to get sweaty palms? It's not complicated if you've done your job right. So the last thought I have for you today is this. Always assume they're going to sign your contract at the end of your presentation. So I start with that confidence. Remember, attitude, enthusiasm, confidence, belief. I start my presentation. I'm starting this today with you folks, assuming you're going to take and do the things that I suggest you do. That's why we've had millions of great people like yourself watching this over the years. You make this assumption by following your scripts, by nodding and smiling, by staying on track, and asking a lot of questions. So a great presentation is when I'm talking to a person that has the desire to do something. A great presentation is when I'm talking to a person that is motivated and qualified to do something. A great presentation is when I have a script I follow. It says closing skills, and I identified 8 points that I gave you in this few 10 to 12 minutes. And a great presentation is smiling and nodding, which I've done a dozen times, and asking a lot of questions, because I do that of you all the time, don't I? So I want to share two things very quickly. You'll notice, and those of you that have been involved with Mike Ferry TV for any length of time, we've been doing this now for 10 years, okay? And the good news is we know that what we're doing is good, because all of our competitors are copying this in some format, whether it be radio or TV. And the one thing I rarely, if ever, do is any kind of a little commercial when I do these little broadcasts for you. But I want to mention that we have our January production retreat, which is probably one of our trend-setting events we do every year coming up in January in Las Vegas at Caesar's Palace. We would like all of you to be there. Call our office, find out the dates, find out the time, sign up. If you are a coaching client, of course, you come at a greatly reduced cost. If you're part of our EMG program with your broker, a reduced cost. Watch the production retreat in January. Very, very simple. How do we deal with a declining market? How do we take more listings that get sales signs or sold signs put in the front yard? How do we get price reductions done effectively? But then the second day and a half, how do we work with buyers? How do we find buyers? How do we pre-qualify buyers? How do we have a showing process that gets them to buy the first time you show them property? So for the first time in a long time, a day and a half on working buyers, because as a market declines or dips, which we're experiencing, buyers become important to us. But the second part or second theme, besides dealing with a descending market, it's going to be meet the millionaires. We have, you're going to love this, I think, over 100 clients that in the calendar year 2018 have earned in excess of $1 million in commissions to them. And these are not people that are selling expensive, high-priced homes. These are regular agents selling regular homes. They just do it in big volume. And it's rarely, if ever, done with a big team. This is real estate salespeople like yourself that are earning in excess of $1 million a year. We're going to have 100 of them at the event. And during the course of our 3 days, I'll have at least 50 of them up on the stage in groups of 5 or 6, and ask each of them one simple question. The most important thing you do to be productive is, so you're going to get, in addition to the material I present, 50 to 60 really great, very pointed, very direct sales tips, techniques, and skills from some of the best real estate people in the history of our industry. Come to the production retreat in January. Again, it's the week of November 12th. We have 2 months to finish strong. I want you to finish strong. Watch this every day this week. Have a great week. Talk to you next week. Thanks for today.